Hi, everybody. My name is Lou. Last name is Schiff. Um, my profession right now is retired. I was a county court judge in Broward County for 28 years. And one of my loves, like your love, has been baseball. Um, I started a project a number of years ago with Professor uh, Bob Jarvis from Nova, and we wrote a book called Baseball and the Law, Cases and Materials. This kind of a heavy book. It's really a prop I'm showing you. It's over 1,000 pages, and it's been used in law schools throughout the country. Ed Edmonds, who's on with us, is one of the co-authors of this book. Um, Ed wrote a really great book on baseball law. It's called Baseball Meets the Law. And if it's written in a style that you don't have to be a lawyer to appreciate, the baseball and the law book that Professor Jarvis and I is more of a research guide for a lot of lawyers use it. A lot of sports writers use it still to this day, and it's taught in college as an elective course. But it basically covers contracts and torts and constitutional law, uh, transactional law, uh, all pretty much every area that you would find on a bar exam, we cover it through baseball cases, and then we take you back to the history of the game, and talk about the foundation, and we try to bust some myths, and that's kind of what we're going to do tonight with uh, our program on baseball and attorneys in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So a couple of years ago, right after Professor, I'm going to call him Bob because he calls me Bob, and I call him Bob. He calls me Lou, and that's just fine. I'm no longer a judge. I'm an adjunct professor at Mitchell Hamlin in St. Paul. Um, when we finished the baseball project, he says, "What else do you want to do?" I said, "I've been doing some research." I said, believe it or not, there's 11 men in the Baseball Hall of Fame who are licensed attorneys. And when I've told that story to people, they said, 11? That can't be, really? So I gave them the name of the 11, and I said, I'd love to do a book on the intersection of baseball and law, and how the legal careers and the legal education may have shaped these men in baseball. And so rather than us write the way we wrote the last time, we put a team together, and Professor Edmonds is one of those team members, where it was Bob and I and 8 other law professors and law librarians, and we each chose somebody we wanted to write about. Bob and I chose Landis, who we're going to discuss tonight, and then I individually chose Tony LaRussa because he's the only member that's alive. He is from Florida, and I know a lot of the same people that Tony knows. And I thought it would be a really fun project because the other projects in the book, if you've had a chance to pick it up or read it, it's based upon history. Tony's history is still not done, and so much of the things that I write about in the book, the last chapter is based upon personal interviews, not only with Tony LaRussa, but with his first employer, a guy named Bill Dooley, one of his law professors, one of his one of his classmates, uh, a lawyer turned a judge who's now in Hillsborough County, who credits Tony with motivating him to go to law school, and Mike Beck are some of the interviews that I was able to do outside of the usual, let me go look stuff up in a book, let me go take a look at newspaper clippings over the last 60 or 70 years. Many of the things that we talk about on Tony are brand new, you haven't heard before. But for tonight, what I'd like to do is I want to talk a little bit about um, let me just get this done. Screen, I think that's good, and share. And I think now you should be able to see the screen, right? You see it has a picture of the book there, everybody? You can all see that okay? Hello? Bueller, can you hear me, folks?
See it.
Okay, as long as you can all see it,
Looks
give me
good.
a thumbs up. Okay. And so I'm going to kind of take you through this. And at the end, I'll have plenty of time for questions. I know we're recording. And I guess Saber's planning on, like, the last one I did is to put it up on their webpage for others to see, and I'm happy to do that. So if you're asking me questions, just remember that anything that you're asking is going to obviously also be on the recording. And I know that Carl put that little bug up there at the beginning, reminding us, but it's also important to let you know. So actually, that's the wrong title of the book, Attorneys in the Baseball Hall of Fame. The original title, that was that. Can you all see this? A collection of biographical essays was added by our publisher to accurately reflect the tone of the book, because although Bob and I edited it, we try to write it in one voice, and so they added that catchphrase, a collection of biographical essays. So to begin with, just let's see if we can get this to work. All right, here we go. On the left is me throwing out the first pitch at the Marlins game this past June 3rd on my 70th birthday. It's when I was 60. They let me throw it out for my 60th birthday. I threw it from the mound and I reached the plate. There's video, if you want it, I'll send it to you. Because I'm one of only about 7 season ticket holders, my brother and I and 5 other people. The Marlins, they're great. The Marlins are just absolutely great when it comes to fan relationships, to do things at the park. So they had me throw out the first pitch for my 70th birthday. On the right is a photo of me at the desk I'm sitting at now, with my Mitchell Hamlin law shirt on. That was the afternoon I got the book. That is the original 1969 World Series program for the New York Mets, who was my childhood team. And when I moved to Florida in the early 70s, I continued to root for the Mets until the Marlins came about in 1993. A little bit about my SABR background. I've been an active member of the South Florida chapter. Almost 10 years ago, Bob and I were honored with a 2017 SABR Research Award for our first book. And I've already told you that I'm a co-author and a co-editor of the new book. And I gave you the information about me being an adjunct, and I'm a retired judge. If you're interested in following us, every day we post another baseball law thing. It's kind of like This Day in Baseball, but with a legal angle. And now that the book is out, I try to coordinate things about and around the date. So, for example, on September the 30th, 84, it was Bowie Kuhn's last day. So we have a mention of that and an interesting quote that Uberoff said when he took over. So whether you're on X or you're on Blue Sky, you can find us either way if you're interested in following us. So let's just talk a little bit about the book. Our publisher has been kind enough that through tomorrow, if you want to buy the book through McFarland, there's a 20% discount. The word is happy 20 for the discount. And I saw this morning it would have been on Amazon that they were offering a discount. I don't know if it's for everybody, but I clicked on the book site this morning and they were offering about $12 off on the book with free shipping and with delivery tomorrow. So you may want to get it through Amazon if you're interested. And this is my contact information if you want to get in touch with me. So this is a special presentation for the Central Illinois SABR chapter, the Hall of Fame as it looked many years ago. And we're going to talk about some of the facts that you probably didn't know about the attorneys. Just as a brief background, so you know that not everyone in the Hall of Fame is a player. So we have it's 3 players, 2 managers, 3 executives, and 3 commissioners. 8 of them were born in the 1800s, and 3 were born in the 1900s, with the last being born Tony La Russa. This is what I had posted today for you all to take a look at. It was both on X and on Blue Sky. So let's talk about Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Over the Monster, which is part of SB Nation and Yahoo Entertainment, did a review of the book. Mike Carlucci, he did a review of the book over this weekend, and if you saw that review, he talks about what we talk about Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and he says that It's the first time that he's really read a story about him that includes warts and all. So, for all of the 11 men in the Hall of Fame that are attorneys, this is not the story you grew up listening to. These are stories you probably never heard of because many of the things we discovered ourselves for the first time, and we're not here to put them on the Mount Rushmore of greatness. We're here to tell the story, and as Mike Carlucci said in his article about the book and what we wrote about Kennesaw Mountain Landis, warts and all. So let's just begin with a couple of things. He was admitted to practice law in Illinois and Indiana, and he never took the bar exam. And I'll get to the reason why later. He was in private practice for about 17 years. He was a district judge, and we're going to get to that. He was the baseball commissioner, and he came into the Hall of Fame in 1944. What I'm going to talk about today is you all know the story about how he banned the Black Sox. You know the story about how he was a czar in baseball, but you do know the story about how he got to where he got. That's the story I don't think you know, and that's the story I want to tell you tonight. So here we go. So he was an absolute awful student, and he was a high school dropout. And I'm sure that until we started doing this research, I had no idea, would never think that a federal judge was a high school dropout. And so he was born in Ohio, and the name Kennesaw Mountain is a tribute to his father's service when he was a member of the Union 35th Ohio Regiment. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of Abraham Landis when he was a Union soldier. Shortly after he was born, the family moved to Logansport, Indiana, and Indiana will play a key role in Kennesaw Mountain Landis's life. And as I told you, by the time he was 14, he was such a poor student that he decided to drop out of college, high school. And right around the time of his 21st birthday, he figured he really has to do something for a living because he wasn't doing much. He was helping out. So he learned shorthand, and he worked as a court reporter, and he moved to Indianapolis, and he got hired in the Indiana Secretary of State's office doing kind of menial things. At age 20, he filed paperwork to become a lawyer, showing that he was a registered voter of good moral character. And at that time in Indiana, you didn't have to go to law school. You could just sign up. Now, Indiana was the last state in the country to do away with that, and that was 1932. So up until 1932, you didn't even have to go to law school to become a lawyer in Indiana. So here's the question I pose. Would you hire a 21-year-old who dropped out of high school and never went to law school as your attorney? Most people have answered that question. No, they wouldn't. So on the left is the very courthouse that Kennesaw Mountain Landis first practiced law in. And so in 1888, at only 21 years old, law license in hand, he quits his job. He opens an office in Marion, Indiana. That's Grant County. That's the courthouse. And he's quoted as saying, well, I missed that. Hold on. There we go. I want to move this so I can read that. Okay. So he's quoted as saying, and this is in the book, I never went to college myself. Mighty few persons know that, but it's a fact. And as anyone would probably tell you, whether you're an attorney or maybe you're an electrician or a carpenter, if you're not properly trained in those areas, you're going to soon realize that what you do is not up to the standards of what somebody who's been trained to do. So his practice failed to take off, and he realized he was going to need some sort of a formal legal education if he wanted to make it as a lawyer. So what did he do? Well, he went to law school, and he relocated to Ohio, and he enrolled in the College of Law at Cincinnati College. Now, there's many things that have been written about him, saying that he went to the city's YMCA law school. But through our research, we uncovered that this could not have been, because the time that he was going to school at Cincinnati College, the YMCA law school was not yet in existence. So he went to college in Cincinnati in 1889. But life sometimes is not about what you know, it's about who you know. So after 1 year being in school in Cincinnati, he decided to move to Chicago because of a friendship that he had with a gentleman by the name of Walter Gresham. And he's pictured here on the right-hand side. And he was a federal appeals court judge. Landis later in life would call him the best friend I ever had. He encouraged Landis, you should come to Chicago. You should enroll in law school in Chicago. Leave Cincinnati. So he leaves Ohio, where he was born, and he enrolls at Northwestern, and he graduates in June of 1891. He barely passed his final classes, and somehow he was admitted to the Illinois bar before he graduated, never having to take the bar. Now, this is called the diploma privilege. Wisconsin is the only state right now that has the diploma privilege, which means that if you go to the University of Wisconsin and you graduate law school there, you don't have to sit for the bar exam. Unlike me, I went to law school in Minnesota. I came to Florida. I got a letter. I took the bar exam. I got a letter from the Florida bar. It was a personal invitation to take a portion of it a second time, which in fact I did. And then I became a lawyer on the second shot around. And again, it's about who you know with connections. And so on the left-hand side is the judge with his wife and his son, who was in the Army. But after graduating from Northwestern, he gave a speech that was called The Radical Conservative Man. And I want you to take a look, and I have it on the screen. These were his words. He warned his audience about radical men, extremists, and agitators, and he promoted a view that German and Italian immigrants were dangerous. That's Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the man that many people said saved baseball. People don't talk about this. Maybe they should. He starts a law practice in Chicago, and he became a teaching assistant at Northwestern. And then in early 1893, Gresham goes to Washington, D.C. after President Grover Cleveland appoints him as the United States Secretary of State. So it's about who you know. So he closes down the practice, wasn't really doing very well. He says goodbye to the law school. I don't want to teach. And he goes to Chicago and he goes to Washington, D.C. to work for this U.S. Secretary of State. But only after 18 months, his best friend, as he described him, passes away, and he has to go back home and restart his practice, but not before he met his future wife, Winifred. And that was while he was in Washington. And that was, as he put it, that was one of the best things that happened to him while he was in Washington. But there's more. Remember, I talked to you about his connections to Indiana and how important they'll be. We're going to talk about these two gentlemen on the screen in a moment. He goes back to Chicago, and still more connections. So he serves as a special assistant U.S. district attorney, probably because of his connections to his former boss. He investigates alleged monopolistic practices in the Chicago beef industry, and this is going to become a very important stepping stone or a link to his Standard Oil case. This is where he learned about monopolies, and he also accepted court appointments to defend indigent prisoners. In 1897, he forms a partnership with lawyers that he met while in Washington, but the firm dissolved shortly thereafter because Landis, who as a commissioner was a no-nonsense guy, so people say, he got into an argument with one of his partners. They didn't agree, and so the partnership dissolves. He's back by himself now, and he starts defending transit companies from personal injury claims, and more importantly, he gets involved in Republican politics. A couple of years later, Landis is a not bad attorney. He argues a case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He loses that case, but I can tell you, not too many lawyers get to the Supreme Court in front of the court to practice. And with the help of his brothers, there's Charles, who's on the right, and Frederick on the left. Most people not aware that he had two brothers who were members of Congress. And as a result of them, Landis went around telling people there's an opening on the federal bench. It's going to be mine. I'm going to get appointed. Not only was he appointed, but his nomination and appointment came on the very same day, March 5th, 1905. There weren't any protracted hearings. He was nominated. They voted yes. And before the day was over, 39-year-old Kennesaw Mountain Landis was a federal judge, a job that would be a lifetime appointment at age 39. So during his 17 years on the bench, he presided over a lot of cases, but two would catch the attention of the baseball leaders and eventually led to him being named as baseball's first commissioner. This is the courthouse. On the right hand is the courthouse where he presided as the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. The two cases we'll talk about are United States versus Standard Oil and the Federal League of Professional Baseball versus the National League of Professional Baseball. Now, many of you are probably aware of the Federal League case, and it just had an anniversary a few days ago. But this isn't the Federal League baseball case that you might be thinking of. This is a little different case. This wasn't the case from the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on the Baltimore Terrapins, saying that baseball was exempt from antitrust laws. This is a different Federal League case. So let's talk about the Standard Oil case. And just as a matter of entertainment, on the screen is a share of stock in Standard Oil signed by Flagler and Rockefeller. On August the 3rd, Landis ordered and this is an interesting case because Standard Oil was accused of monopolistic actions, and Landis ruled in favor of Standard Oil. He ruled it was one of the largest, if not the largest, fine of over $29 million. That's the equivalent of $971 million today. He became instantly the most talked about man in the country, and many people urged him to run for some higher political office, but he didn't want to. He enjoyed cutting out of court in the afternoons because there was only afternoon baseball, and he wanted to watch the Chicago teams play. So most days during baseball season, he was done by 1 o'clock. There was no court. If there was a ball game, you could probably find him at the ballpark and not in his office. So Landis traveled, he took vacations, and the press followed him around. He refused to comment. He kind of, on the fine, which was a proper thing to do as a judge. A judge is not supposed to comment on the cases that they rule upon. And his baseball watching habits, he's there in the open. It's not like we have now where, you pick up your camera and, the Phillies Karen is there immediately. People would have to read about him the next day or the day after in the papers. And then a little after, a little less than a year later, the appellate court, Landis, let me point out to you, was a trial court judge. He was a federal trial court judge, the kind of guy that's calling balls and strikes. He's the only judge in the room. He's trying cases. He's making rulings on motions. And the appeals court are multiple judges that review a decision of a trial judge. And the appeals court unanimously overturns his ruling. The case is sent back, and another judge takes over the case, and a verdict for Standard Oil went in their favor after the case came back. So that's the Standard Oil case, a case that got a lot of national attention, and he enjoyed the attention in the point that he didn't push people away, but he didn't make comments. The other case is the Federal League of Professional Baseball Clubs versus the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs. And on the right-hand side of your screen, this is a share of stock for the Federal Baseball Club of Baltimore. It's meaningless as far as this presentation goes. The meaning it has, it's a piece of the history, so you can see what the stock certificate looked like. So in January 1915, and we're still a ways away from him being commissioner, a new lawsuit lands on Landis's desk, and it's called Federal League of Professional Baseball versus National League. It's a 92-page complaint, and it alleges that the two major leagues, and remember, they weren't associated the way they are now. They were two independent leagues, the American League and the National League, and there's 16 teams basically, and the National Commission were in cahoots. It was an illegal monopoly. They were attempting to destroy the recently established Federal League, which had just started, and they were seeking to become, the Federal League was seeking to become the third major baseball league in the country. Well, Landis basically sits, not basically, Landis sits on the case. If that happened today, a judge is not permitted to sit on cases. Judges have to rule. The Florida rule is that a judge must make a decision within 30 days of having a hearing or report to his or her chief judge and explain to the chief judge why they haven't made such a ruling. And there was no such rules in effect in those days. So Landis basically takes the case and he puts it in his back pocket. Month after month through the entire 1915 season. So you got to remember that this case was filed at the beginning of the 1915 season, trying to get the courts to stop what was going on so the Federal League can exist. But by the time the end of the year rolls along, the Federal League is running out of money, and they reach a settlement with the American and National League. They reach a settlement, but remember, there's Baltimore. Baltimore was not part of the settlement. So some of the teams were absorbed, some of the teams came into Major League Baseball, American and National League, and some of the teams were given money and went away. So the other team owners were content to settle, but the owners of the Terrapins were not, and that's the Federal League case that most people talk about that went to the Supreme Court. So sometimes people get them confused, but there's two different cases. So Judge Landis, he gets chosen as a commissioner. I'm not going to go into depth about how he got chosen as a commissioner because most of you, and if anybody doesn't know, ask and I'll explain it. But you all understand why the Black Sox scandal comes in. The Black Sox are found not guilty. Landis issues his edict, and he bans the Black Sox for life. Well, here he is. He's serving as a federal judge and he's serving as a baseball commissioner at the same time. So here's where things get warts and all kind of a thing. I don't know about you, but it's pretty difficult to do two full-time jobs once. And at the time, there were no rules that said you can't do two full-time jobs. So he's in Chicago. He's going to baseball games. He's being a judge. He's going to baseball games. He's being a judge. He's getting paid $42,500 to be the baseball commissioner. He's getting about $7,500 a year to be a judge. And he's seen as a threat to judicial impartiality. And if a judge is deemed to have some sort of he loses or she loses their ability to remain impartial. It's like a baseball umpire. Then you lose confidence in that person, and then there's some issues there. Up until this point, the American Bar Association was trying to adopt standards for lawyers, and for judges. They had adopted certain ethical standards for lawyers, but they were not able to adopt standards for judges. There was a call. Sports writers, attorneys were calling for him to resign one of your two seats. You can't do both. His responses were, I can do both. I have a good handle on this. Don't you know who I am, kind of a thing. So Congress begins an impeachment hearing, and at the same time, the American Bar Association in 1924 meets right before that. And what they do, the American Bar Association sanctions him and condemns him for what he's doing. So with Congress starting an impeachment and the American Bar Association issuing sanctioning him verbally, saying you shouldn't be doing this, they finally pass a code of conduct after he steps down that says a judge is not allowed to accept inconsistent duties. And this is the first real code of conduct for judges. And many times when I go out and I teach at the law school, or I'll go out and talk to other judges or other lawyers or just general folks, I go, does anybody know where the code of judicial conduct comes from? And unless you've read it before, most people have no idea. And the one word answer is baseball. But for baseball, that was what promoted the American Bar Association from passing these rules for model conduct that judges should follow. So I'm going to skip over a lot of Landis's life because you know the rest of the story on the things he did, but here's things that he did that you might not know what he did. So Landis refused to allow night baseball. He kept women out of professional baseball. He covered up the fact that in 1919, Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker had thrown a game to ensure that the Tigers and not the Yankees finished in third place. And what's significant about that is the third place team got money in the American League for finishing there. And then, and most of you know this, and I'm sure you're aware of this, in 2020, his name was removed from the Most Valuable Player Award because of the mounting pressure saying that Landis, and it's true that Landis turned a blind eye, refused to integrate baseball while he was commissioner, and wouldn't do anything to assist in the integration of baseball. So that's kind of the story of Landis. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay, maybe, Carl, is to open up the floor for some questions. Is that good? All right. Hello, Carl, can you hear me?
Go right ahead.
Unmute yourself.
Go,
Okay.
go right
Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah. Yeah, everybody unmute yourselves at this point. And let's see. Can you unmute them or do I have to unmute them? Let's see. Let's see what I can do here. I see everybody. Open up your cameras, open up your microphones, and let's talk, because this is the fun part. Brian Woodward's comment, Landis sounds terrible. That's all I got. Well, the purpose of writing about these folks is to let you know that maybe he doesn't belong on a Mount Rushmore. There were some things that he did were good, but he's 39 years old and he gets appointed a judge. I was 41 when I became a judge, and many people said to me in 1997, "Wow, 41, that's really young." 39, I did some research. The youngest federal judge up until that time was somebody from Florida in the 1850s who was 26 years old. So Landis was one of the 3 or 4 youngest federal judges appointed up until this time. And again, I believe that goes back to his ties with Washington, D.C. and his brothers. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question. I
Sure.
have not had a chance to read the book yet, so I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm a history professor at Danza College in Cupertino, California. I'm currently working on a manuscript in which Landis is sort of a central figure in it. And as a historian, trying to use the evidence I can find to bring forth, the most accurate and authentic understanding of all of these individuals. And of course, as you articulated, Landis, and as even Petrusa, in his great biography of Landis mentions, right, that like, at least in his conclusion, he never, or he doesn't, he acknowledges that Landis should not be, noted for anything as far as like, he clearly is not doing anything to integrate. And I'm trying to find evidence for what he did to stop or slow integration.
All right.
And if you have some sources or something that you can point
So we
to.
have, there's 134 footnotes on Landis. Now, Ed Edmonds is here, and he's also one of our authors. And Ed, can you share some of your research? Because Ed, a lot of Ed's research wasn't exactly on Landis, but what happened after Landis. And so he can share to you that he had to clean up that other people had to clean up his mess. Ed?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the bank embezzlement case and how Landis got impeached, but that's Lindsay. That's a good thing to try to chase down, because it's far more just inactivity that seems to be the focal point of what most people say about Landis not being willing to integrate baseball. I think there are a couple articles out there that have some reference to things he might have said, but an actual, don't like necessarily use the smoking gun analogy, but something that you could say, oh, here's some things that absolutely show that Landis wouldn't countenance that. The chapter I wrote on Larry McPhail, he comes in first.
That's what I wanted you to mention. Talk about the McPhail report. So this is where it dovetails your question about Lands and Larry McPhail's report.
Right. And one of the things that when the report was presented, everybody was supposed to destroy their copy of the report. And there was a subsequent report in which, and this is in the 1940s, and the part about race relations and possible integration that McPhail had overseen, that was excised. But although supposedly everybody did leave their reports behind and they were shredded or burned or whatever, one actually survived. So, and that one subsequently came to light. And so there, for instance, you see McPhail saying, first of all, a lot of white fans will simply not attend baseball games if there are black players. The other kind of money side of things that many of you may know about is that somebody like Griffith, who owned the Senators and was, there you can definitely find some comments by him that stand up to scrutiny. But he also, the Homestead Grays typically played games in Griffith Stadium in D.C., and he made a lot of money, perhaps enough to be in the black at the end of the year by renting the stadium out. So McPhail is there. There's going to be a book coming out on Ford Frick, who's not had much written about him. And it's going to take a look at Happy Chandler. So you could look at a lot of what's going on in the 1940s and say Landis, like he was in the federal baseball case from 1915, very quiet about things, but it was certainly understood that Landis was not in favor of integration, and that if you pressed the issue, he was going to do some things to make sure that didn't happen on his watch. Chandler was subsequently kind of lionized. There's a new book out that's a biography of both Billy Williams and Willie McCovey. And Billy Williams gave a whole lot of credit to Chandler at his inauguration, or his speech at Cooperstown, pardon me for that, in which he kind of gives a lot of credit to Chandler. But Dave Bomer, who's written this biography of and is also a upstate Illinois, Chicago resident most of the year, said that his research shows that there's very little that you could actually point to that said Chandler was actually in favor of this and would have done some things to perhaps alter what Landis had done. But I've looked for that, Lindsay, and I don't think you saw anything in the biography that you just pulled off the shelf there that kind of supports this. Landis doesn't really have a lot of biographies, right?
No.
or papers that you could look at and say, okay, let me sort out a little bit more of the reality of what Landis did. But I do think if you go back and you kind of look at what Lou mentioned about his kind of underlying prejudice against German immigrants, et cetera, and just thinking about what life was like relative to race relations in the United States for most of his life up into the World War II era. I think it's pretty safe to say that Landis was not in favor of any integration for baseball. One of the things that was going on in New York City at the time, and I apologize for the long-winded answer, was there were ordinances and in New York City that could conceivably have been used, and baseball was concerned about that, which would have forced them to, under New York municipal law, to deal with the fact that there was anti-discrimination and hiring ordinances there that were going to come forward. And so that's kind of what I know about that aspect of Landis. So I think you're right, Lindsay, that there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot more than speculation that his lack of interest in this, that it didn't happen under his watch, I think is pointed to more than the idea that he was here's some evidence of when he told people no.
Opportunities were available at the time. And when you read, and if you read it in conjunction with Ed's chapter, and he talks about the problem of race, this is only written 4 years after Landis passes away, or 2 years after Landis passes away. And the concern is, we're going to lose all this money because all these other teams are renting from us. And if we integrate, then how are we going to make money? But it goes beyond. Again, it goes beyond that. But that was their excuse for it at the time. And then when you move on, then it took, Branch Rickey to finally do it, to get it done under Chandler's watch. To finally get things done in baseball. And then the rest of the story is it took the Red Sox until 1962 to finally get a ball player, and that was Pumpsie Green. It took the Yankees until 1959 when they signed Elston Howard. So we look at this moment, and baseball has this habit of saying, look how great we are for the things that we've done. But they should have done it earlier than that. Look what we did. We integrated. Well, it was integrated in the 1800s and early 1900s, and you took that away. And so, and many of you are better historians on that area than I am. And sometimes baseball has a way of making themselves look better than they really are. Their PR people do a good job, and I can tell you that we didn't consult Major League Baseball on how we should write this book.
Well, Leslie just put something in the chat that's a very good point about Landis relative to major league teams playing against Negro League teams. And there was a book a few years ago by Dixon that talks about the Dizzy and Daffy Dean exhibition after the Cardinals had won the World Series against, I think it was an all-star Negro League team. And most of the research that I've read show that, head-to-head competition between Negro League teams and major league teams showed that they more than held their own, regardless of whether those were all-star teams or whatever. But I don't know if Leslie wants to come in on this, but I think that's a very important point that Leslie's brought up, that Landis did put an end to that. And, not that it was a race issue, but I think Leslie also could talk about the fact that Babe Ruth got suspended and in trouble for barnstorming. So, there were things like that that I think Landis wanted to make sure, particularly after the Federal League case, he wanted to make sure that there weren't any other attempts to try to create competition for the American League and National League.
Yeah, I think you said it well, Ed. I mean, but that we know he absolutely did that. He did rule again, and he said major league teams as a whole can't play against Negro League teams. I mean, he said they could only be, and it wasn't. It was more about the barnstorming, it came out as this is a race issue, right? Because that's who he ruled. That was the major ruling, and then he had others as well. I would also say, Lindsay, his his discussion with Paul Robeson, when Paul Robeson makes his presentation in 1943 to him, and Landis's remarks might be something to look at as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that I didn't know a whole lot about until relatively recently was how often major league teams did play exhibitions during the season on off days. So there could have been, there certainly were opportunities to allow major league teams to play Negro League teams during the regular season, because they were doing it against all kinds of teams for years and years. I mean, there were decades of that going on.
I think, Lou, as you just pointed out, you've showed us how much. I mean, Landis had an incredible amount of power when he first started as commissioner.
And you're right. And he took that job. He took that job telling the owners, it's my way or the highway. And in the beginning, and he was challenged, but the person that was challenged the most, that lost the most, was Bowie Kuhn. But yes, he was challenged, and they gave him this unfettered power to do everything you wanted to do, because baseball at that time was in shambles. There were bets going on, people were cheating, people were throwing games. That, I think, the Black Sox is the tip of the iceberg, but that's who got caught.
Well, and I think
something had to be done.
It was certainly, I think, the situation before Landis became commissioner that perhaps the most powerful man in Major League Baseball was Ban Johnson. And he systematically went through and destroyed the power base and maybe even the person, Ban Johnson.
I'm sorry about your Mets, Leslie.
Well,
I'm sorry. Not really.
I know I know. That's been everyone's refrain today. It's okay.
It's okay. All you had to do is beat the Rockies one more time, or the White Sox one more time. That's what makes baseball fun. Sure, go ahead, Lindsay.
Leslie, you mentioned the Paul Robeson report from 1943, and the comments subsequently that then Landis made in response to that. Do you know a good location to find or pull up that report and
Yeah, the
comment?
baseball Hall of Fame actually has the document.
Really?
Hmm.
Not that I doubt you. I just, in like doing all my research, I'm trying to like, make sure I'm hitting on everything. And so, and I apologize, I'm not trying to hijack this to like finalize all my
No,
research
that's what
here,
we're
but
here
I do
for.
appreciate, the support and help that I can get.
Yeah, no, that's exactly why we have these meetings, is to help, create networks and answer questions and help people do their, do research. So don't apologize at all.
Appreciate that insight there, Leslie. And going back to Ed, like you were saying, because I've seen the most that I've found is like the exchanges between Clark Griffith and Landis that really reinforced, the racist ideas about Black athletes, and some of that was built off of the war report, the War Army Report of 1921, and all of these things. So that was definitely something that was being reinforced through the decisions that a lot of the owners were making, and Landis was clearly a part of that whole process too. But
Well, Lou, tell me, is there any other time that you know of when Landis caved to the owners on anything he didn't want to do? Except for I mean, to me, that seems like pretty strong evidence that he had a pretty strong feeling about, because
He
he
had a
never came, did he? I don't
no,
know of any other
not that
cases
I'm
where he,
aware of. I mean, he had a pretty. I didn't, Bob and I, and we wrote this chapter. We didn't write the definitive biography on him, and so each chapter is around like about 15, 20 pages. Our chapter has 100+ footnotes. So, as one person said in a book review, that you could tell they didn't use AI. They actually have cited it, and so we could have gone on. The purpose wasn't to write a biography about Landis or about LaRusso or about Ricky. It was really just to give you a flavor of a person that you may not have known about. So when I came into this project, I had no idea. And what interested me is, how did he become a judge? Because everybody that I know, that, including myself, everybody has a different story on how they became a judge. Did the governor appoint you? Did the citizens elect you? How did that happen? So I was really interested, and I dug in on how he became a judge. And Bob and I co-wrote this. And when I got the information regarding what was going on, I contacted the ABA. And then the ABA, American Bar Association, they were so pleased because nobody ever really asked them for this information before. I go, well, here's what I want. Can you send it to me? And they sent me pictures and information about that 2-day meeting they had. And I kind of like dug into this stuff, and you start reading it, and they're censuring him. And it's like, wow, it's pretty wild stuff. If he did this today, all right, if Landis was a federal judge and he did this today, he'd be bounced. He'd be impeached. And when Landis found out that Congress wanted to impeach him on fact that the ABA was censoring him, that's when he said, all right, I really don't want to be a judge anymore. I'll just be a baseball commissioner. He read the tea leaves, and he got out of there. And so it's a fascinating story for me as a judge. This is wild. This is how we got the code of conduct. Baseball. It's like the one word answer. How did we get a code of conduct? It was baseball. And why? Because you had a man who thought he was above the law in a lot of ways. I mean, any of you that, if you're professors, you're doing a job, and then you come in, it's one thing for me to write a book at night and spend 3-4 hours a night writing a book and doing it on my own time. But you can't be a journalist full time and be a judge full time. You just can't do some of those things full time. Something's going to collapse on you.
Well,
and he wanted to do both.
And I think, to get into that story a little bit about his impeachment, Leslie, he waited until that impeachment had blown over and the ABA had backed away from censoring him. So there's another example of where he was not, he ended up being exactly at the top of the power structure. And of course, what he told all the owners when they hired him is that there will be absolutely no negative comments about me in the press or anywhere else. You can't bring a lawsuit against me, any of those kind of things. And that pretty much held true, right? There wasn't any backing away from that. But his impeachment was interesting. And I did some research on this probably about a decade or so ago. But he was impeached by a congressman named Benjamin Welty. And he was an Ohio congressman. And what made Welty upset was a case that Landis had where the gentleman by the name of Francis Carey, he was a bank teller at a bank in Ottawa, Illinois. And he pleaded guilty to stealing $96,000 from the bank. Now think about that in terms of what kind of money that was for a bank teller. But Landis said, you know what? You paid this guy $90 a month. You deserved for him to steal this money from you. And basically, that's exactly what he said. And Welty and Nathaniel Dial, who was senator from South Carolina, they both had made money, as had Larry McPhail's father, from running local banks, creating locally owned banks that they headed. And so this senator and this congressman thought, you know, this behavior by a federal judge of exonerating somebody who had embezzled almost $100,000 from a local bank, that, you know, they just couldn't countenance that. And so that's another side of kind of the Landis story that people don't know about, because actually the impeachment of judges, I mean, there is certainly some history of that, of impeachment of federal judges, but not very many.
Right.
And like I said, he waited until Welty was kind of lame duck. So, you know, he waited until Welty's term in Congress expired, and you know, also kind of waited out any other criticism, and then finally said, well, you know, okay, now I'll just be the commissioner of baseball and I'll resign from the court.
I thought your presentation was really interesting. I didn't know it was early history.
Thank you,
So
Mary.
thank you for
Appreciate it.
that.
Oh, my
And
pleasure.
I just have a couple questions about maybe jurisdiction, like that, if he had any issues like with LaGuardia, he was trying to invoke New York law, right? To get baseball integrated. And also, was he the one who basically banned girls from Little League, or what was Little League years ago? And how did he have that jurisdiction? Yeah.
He didn't. Well, Gerald Ford is the one that let, you know, through legislation, girls started playing Little League. Both you could play you can play with the boys, and that was because Little League was a federally chartered organization. So Congress changed that, but that was because of the lawsuit that was filed in New Jersey, Maria Pepe's lawsuit, and she's the one that I think it was Ed. Correct me. It's in Ed wrote about it. We wrote about it too in our books. Maria Pepe was about 1973, 74, 75, somewhere in there, about the same time that Melissa Lutke. Now, Melissa Lutke used the New York laws to bust the door down and to kick the door open. And that's what they relied on, because Yankee Stadium was New York City owned, and her lawyer Schwartz was able to do all those things. Had that same lawsuit been filed in a private stadium in a different state, there would have been different results.
And her book goes into great detail about the very particular legal argument that was made, that because the 14th Amendment requirement is one of state action, you had to make this connection. And it didn't hurt that the judge who heard Melissa's case had actually argued the major parking authority case that kind of pushed the entanglement theory that was used for many years to find what might otherwise be perceived as private action to be state action and bring the 14th Amendment in.
Right, was it a restaurant and the parking
Yes,
lot?
That's right. It's
Yeah.
exactly what it was, Mary.
Was
Are you
trying
an
to
attorney?
discriminate. Yeah.
Are you an attorney, Mary?
Well,
No,
Oh.
I read Melissa's book.
Isn't it great? Isn't it great? Yeah. I'm going with my wife next month up to New York. We're going to listen to her speak at the 92nd Street Y.
Oh,
If you
fantastic.
haven't,
With Clinton,
yeah,
Hillary Clinton.
yeah. Here's a plug for a book. Now I can plug a book because I'm not a judge anymore, and she's become a really good friend. If you're looking to read a really good book and you want to see a really great history about a really great person, Locker Room Talk is just fantastic. It's Rutgers University Press, and I know there's a discount code out there. I think it's half off now, and yeah, someone just posted. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he voided the contract of Jackie Mitchell when they were barnstorming in Tennessee, and she allegedly struck out Gehrig, and I said allegedly struck out Gehrig and Ruth. But Melissa's story is a fantastic story. Goes into a lot of detail about her own life, her own private life, her upbringing, her love of baseball and the Red Sox, and it's really a great read.
Yeah, I highly recommend. And I think if you go on her Facebook page or Substack, you can get a discount code.
Yeah. There's
So,
a discount code for
yeah.
Rutgers. Yeah, I think it's 50 off now.
Wow.
yeah. The Maria Pepe case was, the appellate division decided that case on March 29th of 1974. And again,
I
there's
didn't have any books in front of me yet.
fact that
I'm trying to remember from my.
the fact that Little League Baseball had a federal charter was what allowed that case to move forward in attacks on, attempts to kind of prevent that. And we certainly are looking forward here in Minnesota to Mary coming, because we're going to have later next month in October a fantastic presentation that is going to focus on girls playing baseball. And I've long been an advocate of that. It kind of colors my view about softball, that kind of took over and prevented girls who wanted to play baseball from doing that. It's, when you look at parallel sports, that one kind of sticks out as something quite interesting. Just like the rules for girls basketball when I was a kid was changed so much. So, but it's like, oh, they play by the same rule as guys. They got rid of 6-on-6 basketball where, most of the players could only play half court. So it's, I'm looking forward to that conversation and continued attempts to try to empower girls to play baseball.
No, you guys are wonderful up there. I'm so looking forward to getting together with you. And I love our SABR neighbors to the north. I live in Milwaukee, so I'm looking forward to it, and especially to meet Chelsea Falzone and
Yes.
Emma Charlesworth Sealer. So if you can get up to Minnesota or down to Minnesota, wherever you are,
It's
highly
in
recommend.
Minnesota.
It'll be
It's
fun.
there. Yeah, it's. I had a pleasure to go to a Brewers Marlins game this summer. First time there. Sorry we beat you that weekend. It was a lot of fun.
I'm actually a Cubs fan, so.
Oh, okay.
Although I used
Well,
to
then,
work for the Brewers.
what'd you do for the Brewers?
I gave tours, ballpark tours.
Uh-huh.
I was kind of an imposter, and a lot of my fellow employees used to like to out me, but I was a Brewers fan when they were in the American League, and then I had to make a choice.
I love that park. I love the energy from that park. It's such a big park. You don't realize how big it is. And the fans there, what a great fan base they have in Milwaukee. It was really, and they were nice to us. Okay, and I've been to Philadelphia to watch the Marlins play, and they're not very nice to us when we go watch them. But in Milwaukee or San Francisco, they're just very nice. They're fans, and they let you cheer, and they don't throw beer at you and things like that. It's good.
Wrigley is like that too, but yeah, Milwaukee is very friendly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, any other questions? So you all know what the book is. So I'll just give one more, plug for it. McFarland Publishing. It was a work of love for us. It was just so much fun to put it together and to meet so many. Because the only one I knew besides Bob was Ed, because Ed's come in and spoken to my baseball law class over the years, and that's actually Bob. And I don't know how many of you know Bob, but he put this team together. Without him, he was the glue. We were just kind of he set the lineup up, and he pointed us and he helped us out, and yeah, he put this all together. And he's a Yankee fan, and I don't hold that against him. And it was just so much fun to write, and I'm glad he picked me, because I don't know what else I would have done with my free time. So it's good. You all have my email
I think
address. Schiff,
it's
yeah.
important to know, Lou, that Bob really did major editing of each chapter to create one voice, and you'll see some things that are parallels in each of the chapters that Bob really wanted people to find out. It's the other thing is, you don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can pick, because although the chapters follow a certain formula, the lives of these individuals do not necessarily intersect all that often.
Yeah, we put them in the order that they got enshrined. And so John Montgomery Ward is not at the beginning of the book, where he would be if you started going with some of the older players. John Montgomery Ward, they waited until 1964, after he was long gone, to finally enshrine him. And then we have a little fun stuff in the back of the book. We list some lawyers, attorneys that are not in the Hall of Fame, but would be of interest, kind of like a batting order. And then there's some, Bob went to great lengths to do research on estate values, and he kind of like a baseball card information. So that's in the back of the book too. It was just a fun project to do. McFarland as a publisher I thought they were great to us. Once we got things rolling and did it, the book actually, just if you're interested in writing, McFarland put the book out 3 months earlier than we thought they were ever going to get it out. But we had some very cooperative writers that got our stuff early, and McFarland surprised us, because originally we thought the book wasn't coming out until the World Series this year. And then all of a sudden I find out we're in the middle of July, and they're calling me up and they go, "Okay, where do you want your copies sent to?" It's like, "Oh, it's July. Yeah, we're done. We're ready to go." So it was pretty cool. They worked quickly. Once we got them the material, a nice staff, good people, and I love the project. And now the playoffs start tomorrow, which is great. There's
And
games all day long, and now that I'm retired, I get to sit on my couch all day and watch baseball. It doesn't get any better than that.
yeah, and if you enjoy going down rabbit holes as much as I do, looking at some of the things in the footnotes become really pretty fascinating. And the one thing I would say about Larry MacPhail is there's almost nothing in Larry MacPhail's life that doesn't have multiple stories. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out which of these things are true, whether it's the year he was born in, the place he was born in, the whole thing about trying to kidnap the Kaiser and bring him to justice, and the ashtray, which really wasn't the Kaiser's ashtray. It was the property of the man whose place he was staying at in exile. But boy, it was so many things. And unfortunately, one of the things I found out is that there is a bad mistake in this book about Larry McPhail, which is that we repeated the story about him losing 200 cases representing Union Pacific Railroad because of losses that were a result of the San Francisco fire. And it turns out there's nothing true about that at all. You know, and that's one of the things we thought, oh, that's a great story, right? He was, you know, Larry McPhail wasn't a lawyer because he had so many failures in the year and a half that he actually practiced law. And it's like, well, but no, he didn't work for the two attorneys that people thought he did or any of that. It's just, there's so many little tidbits in this book that corrects mistakes about these 11 individuals. And so and I think for people who are in SABR and cherish the truth and historical accuracy so much, this is a fabulous example of what, you know, digging and digging and digging can unearth that will change narratives that people have long accepted as accurate.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I'll have to snag a copy of the book while it's on sale.
Thank you.
But,
Appreciate it.
I will say I did appreciate your comment on the Cobb speaker case, because that's something that's kind of central to what I'm writing about as well. And so your comments on it kind of gave me some reassurance that like my position's going to hit.
If there's any information you need, you can go to the SABR directory and all my information's there. I put my email address up on the screen, which is fine. The last program I did, I put my phone number out there, but then I realized that they were going to broadcast this to the whole world, so I took my phone number off it. But enough folks on this call have my personal number, and if I don't pick up your call, it's not because I don't want to talk to you, it's because I think someone's trying to sell me end of life insurance or car insurance or homeowners insurance. But if you leave a message, I promise you I'll call you back.
I appreciate that, and thanks
Absolutely.
so much.
Thanks. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for letting us show up. Ed's
thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming in and helping out. And I think our next program we're going to do is on Tony LaRussa on Saturday for a chapter in New Orleans. Is that right, Ed? We got a chapter in New Orleans we're doing on Saturday, I think. And then Ed's going to take a big program in a couple of weeks out in California. I'm going to be actually in Ed's neighborhood, but I'm going up to the law school for the 125th anniversary celebration. So Ed's going to do a program for a combined chapters out there, but the SABR's been putting them out there, and we're changing the different authors. And